Everyone has heard of bulgogi, but have you heard of its bigger brother, spicy pork bulgogi? We're gonna cook up some spicy, sweet, saucy marinated pork, or as it is known in Korean, Jeyuk Bokkeum. Step 1 is getting this thin pork cut called boksae. Boksae is a cut of meat from the neck of the pork, but you can also cook this using thinly sliced pork belly. Both cuts can be found readily at your local Asian grocery store. Once unwrapped, pat the pork dry with some paper towels. The purpose of this step is to get rid of the moisture, which leads to a less pork smelling dish, if that makes sense. Unlike beef, pork does have a smell that can be unpleasant, so pat the meat dry. Next up is separating all the pork slices. This will not only allow for the marinade to penetrate into every meat slice, but also will prevent these thin slices from clumping and forming an unwanted pork meatball once cooked. Now that you have a mountain of pork, we're going to give it a final pat to get all the moisture and pork juices extracted. With that, we're now going to cut these into chunks. The sizes of chunks should be bite-sized. However, it is important to remember that the meat shrinks as you cook it, so a little bigger than you think is the goal here. Time to start the marinade process. Put your meat to the side and get a metal mixing bowl. To the bowl, I'm adding 1 tablespoon of sugar, a tablespoon of vinegar, 3 tablespoons of soy sauce, and then add your meat. I forgot to add what makes Korean food Korean: garlic. Add your ground garlic. I added around a tablespoon, but this may be too much, so put less if you think it's too much. Anyways, I added some ground ginger afterwards, and this can also mask the porkiness of the pork. Time to mix. If you find touching raw meat unsettling, use some gloves or these convenient Korean plastic kitchen gloves. You're just trying to get all the liquid and spices incorporated into the meat. If you do feel some slices sticking together, try to peel them apart. Whoops, I forgot to add the sake. I cleaned up the recipe in the description below, so check it out. It will be more organized than what I'm doing right now. Anyways, I added 1 tablespoon of sake and mixed it thoroughly. Sake is also supposed to get rid of the porkiness, so that's an added benefit. If you don't have sake, use vodka. Once mixed, let it soak for around 30 minutes. At this point, you may be thinking that this dish is just a sausage fest. Don't worry, because we're now preparing the vegetables. Add 1 big onion or 2 small ones. We want them to be around an inch thick so they don't burn or dissolve during the cooking process. These onions are also going to be a key source of water, which will leach out while cooking, creating a very pleasant marinade. Next, get 3 Serrano peppers to put the spicy in the spicy pork bulgogi dish. I'm cutting up 3 Serrano peppers, but add as much as you dare. With that, we have our prep done. Turn your stove on high and place a large wok style pot. We're going to lightly coat the bottom with some oil to help the cooking process, as boksae doesn't really have a lot of fat. If you're using pork belly, I would say don't add any oil since pork belly has plenty of fat. Once that is done, we're adding the meat. The point of this step is to half cook it and not cook it all the way through. We're just trying to give the meat a head start since it takes a bit longer to cook than the vegetables. After a couple of minutes of searing the pork on its sides, add your sliced onions and serrano peppers. This is totally optional, but if you want to add some green onions, go ahead. I had some frozen green onions that I wanted to get rid of, so I'm putting it here. And on that point, basically most vegetables would work in this dish. Anything that you think goes well with a spicy gochujang based marinade is good to go. Speaking of gochujang, at this point I bet you're like, hey Catalog 28, I thought this was supposed to be a spicy dish. Where is the spice? And you're right. To this pan, add around 1 tablespoon of coarsely ground Korean pepper flakes. Next, add some black pepper. I believe we put black pepper in it to also mask the porkiness of the pork. Once that is done, we're adding 1 tablespoon of finely grounded Korean pepper flakes, which not only brings the heat, but also turns the dish into a vibrant red dish. I'm also not sure what's the difference between the 2 red pepper flakes, so if you only have 1, that should be fine. To top off the spiciness, we're going to add 1 tablespoon of gochujang. The gochujang will also thicken the marinade a bit. Finally, add 1 swirl of sesame oil. This brings a nice roasted, toasted smell to all of this spiciness, so it will even it out pretty well. And with that, we're going to give it a good mix. Make sure you break up the onions and get the marinade through all the slices of pork. If some of the pork is still stuck together, try to peel them apart. If you don't, you'll get like a thick slice of pork, which is not tasty in my opinion. I'm also going to add some crushed sesame seeds because I like sesame seeds. This is another optional ingredient, so you do you. Finally, try a piece of the meat. At this point, all the pork should be cooked through, especially since these are thinly sliced. In my case, the marinade was not so sweet, so I added some corn syrup. If you're like against corn syrup, then just add some sugar or honey instead. If it is not as spicy as you would like it to be, add some more gochujang or creamy pepper flakes. Once that is all done and balanced out, give it a final mix and you're good to go. Although this step is optional, this really elevates your dish, so I'll highly recommend it. Get a torch and start torching this dish. This will provide that smokiness to the whole dish as if it was like grilled at a Korean barbecue place. Also, if you can toss your meat, this can be done fairly easily. And with that, you have what I consider the superior bulgogi, Jeyuk Bokkeum. This dish is spicy, sweet, and fairly cheap since you're using pork. I would totally recommend learning this dish since there are few dishes that can bring this level of complexity in few basic steps. Thank you.